Welcome to this session of IntelliQuest's The World's 100 Greatest Books, featuring the Instant Expert Learning System. You're about to be introduced to a 20th century American writer who won both the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction and the Nobel Prize for Literature, whose work and life both fascinated the public, and whose books are so controversial that critics and scholars still engage in fiery debates over them. The writer is Ernest Hemingway. In this session, we'll explore Hemingway's 1929 novel, A Farewell to Arms. Ernest Hemingway was a novelist, journalist, and short story writer who used his own experiences and adventures in life to create semi-autobiographical fiction that conveyed his distinctive view of what life is and how man should live it. As a writer and as a celebrity, he was bigger than life, inspiring phrases that have become a permanent part of literary history. Phrases like the Hemingway Code, the Hemingway Hero, and the Hemingway Cult. Later, you'll learn what these phrases mean and how they influenced critics, readers, and future authors. Ernest Hemingway was a member of and the key spokesman for the famous Lost Generation, the group of disillusioned young people, artists, and writers who'd emerged from the First World War completely disenchanted with life itself. Members of this lost generation, many of whom expatriated to Europe, were known for their restlessness and their avid pursuit of pleasure. As the voice of that generation of outcasts, and because of his own flamboyant lifestyle, Hemingway has become almost an American legend or folk hero. In his youth, he was known by the nickname Champ. In middle age, he was known as Papa, a nickname the public still uses affectionately. Even people who haven't read his books know a great deal about Ernest Hemingway. His passion for liquor, his volatile marriages, his fights, the safaris and exotic travels, the hunting, fishing, and bullfighting, and his violent suicide shortly before he turned 62. This He-Man image, this homage to machismo which he lived and which he promoted in his books, is what most people identify with Hemingway. What fewer people realize is that Hemingway was a very literate man, an avid reader and a prolific writer, who from the beginning was preoccupied with his craft and his work. Gertrude Stein, the colorful expatriate who settled in Paris and served as mentor to artists of the lost generation, once said that Hemingway, in spite of all the public celebrity and posturing, was a man of museums. Hemingway's work is most famous for two traits: for his style, which was uniquely sparse and economic, and for his interpretation of heroism, which was based on courage and action rather than thought or ideals. The sparse style that he developed has been the source of both praise and criticism. Hemingway himself said that good prose was like an iceberg, with only the smallest part showing on the surface. That's why his style is often referred to as the art of the unsaid. His descriptions and dialogue are simple and concise. The vocabulary is deliberately limited to concrete words, things, and actions, with few abstractions, and, as one scholar noted, lots of nouns, simple verbs, and no adjectives. This makes his narrative appear clear, precise, and honest. It means the emotions and thoughts are not stated, and it's up to the reader to discern them. In fact, the deeper the emotions, the less is said. This innovative use of language was not just a superficial style. It also cleverly reflected the basic nature of the Hemingway hero. He was a man who distrusted rhetoric and abstractions. He was a man with little respect for words or vague ideals. In A Farewell to Arms, you'll see that the hero has been completely disillusioned by the rhetoric of World War I and by the hypocrisy between stated ideals and the realities of war. So this famous spare dialogue of Hemingway's is also an appropriate reflection of the mistrust his characters share for rhetoric, intellectual thought, and abstract ideas. They want life to be simple, clear, honest, and natural. In A Farewell to Arms, Hemingway never even describes the main character, Frederick Henry, and this omission of physical and personality traits was a bold innovation and one dimension of the Hemingway style. But to critics, Hemingway's art of the unsaid also has drawbacks. Sometimes, especially in long passages of dialogue, people feel that Hemingway's books become monotone. More importantly, he's been accused of practicing what is called the art of evasion in his work, both in language and in story. Many people believe his characters avoid the complexities of life and that his work is limited to areas where thinking isn't required. He's been called anti-intellectual because his characters rely on action and activity and avoid profound thought. Raw physical courage seems to be the greatest and only goal for which they strive. Action, in this sense, becomes an evasion from the challenges of life. A man can control a gun, a fishing rod, or a submissive woman, but he cannot control the forces of war and death. When Ernest Hemingway published A Farewell to Arms in 1929, he soared to literary and financial success. 3 years earlier, he'd published The Sun Also Rises, which brought him critical recognition, but which didn't capture the hearts of the public as A Farewell to Arms did. Gertrude Stein believed it to be his best novel. The book sold 80,000 copies in only 4 months, and Hemingway was launched into the limelight. It was the beginning of the celebrity status that would soon make it difficult to distinguish between the writer, the man, and the legend. A Farewell to Arms is set in the period of 1914 to 1918, during the First World War. This war, referred to as the Circus of Death, severely jolted the ideals of Western society. The horrible deaths of trench warfare, the enormous casualties, mismanagement by generals, and corruption on all sides made idealism and patriotism seem hollow. It became apparent that the individual had little value and that personal courage was useless against the cold and massive war machinery. A general disgust with war developed, and youth sought refuge in pleasure.